The wind screamed across the endless stretch of frontier, tearing through the brittle scrub and sending tumbleweeds skittering like frightened animals. Rain hammered the earth in relentless sheets, turning dust to mud and swallowing what little moonlight managed to fight its way through the storm-bloated clouds. Lightning split the sky in jagged veins of white, illuminating the wasteland for the briefest of moments before the darkness slammed shut again like a coffin lid. In the midst of that chaos, a lone figure staggered along a half-formed trail, a shadow against the night. Her dress, once fine calico, hung in sodden tatters around her ankles. Her hair, the color of spun copper, clung to her face and neck in heavy strands. One hand pressed to the curve of her stomach as though trying to shield the life inside her from the storm, while the other groped blindly through the rain. Eloise Calder had been beautiful once, the kind of beauty that drew the eyes of ranch hands and townsfolk alike when she passed, the kind that made young men bold and old men wistful. She was the daughter of Judge Abram Calder, a man whose name carried weight in every court and saloon this side of the Great Divide. But out here, in the black throat of the frontier storm, all of that meant nothing. The land did not care for names or faces. It swallowed the weak and tested the strong until they broke. Lightning flashed again, throwing the landscape into stark relief. Low hills hunched against the horizon, the skeletal remains of dead trees reaching toward the heavens. Somewhere far off, a coyote howled, its voice snatched away by the storm. Eloise stumbled, her foot catching in a rut. She went down hard on one knee, the mud sucking at her skirts. A sob escaped her lips, but she choked it back. No one would hear her out here. No one but God and ghosts. Mason, she whispered, the name torn from her throat more curse than plea. Mason Griggs, smooth-talking, silver-eyed devil that he was. He'd promised her the world once, promised her a wedding band and a homestead, told her stories of California valleys, where the grass grew tall as a man's waist and rivers ran thick with gold dust. And she, foolish girl, had believed him. Instead, he'd taken her, in every sense of the word, and when the belly began to swell, when her father's eyes grew suspicious and tongues started to wag, Mason had dragged her out here under cover of night. Said he'd take her someplace safe. Said they'd start fresh. Then he'd vanished, leaving her with nothing but a worn blanket, a half-empty canteen, and a storm that showed no mercy. The wind screamed again, a voice of the damned. Eloise forced herself upright, one hand cradling her belly, the other clutching the canteen strap. Her legs felt made of water, ready to buckle at any moment. The child within her stirred, a flutter she barely registered. She took another step, then another. A sudden flicker of movement caught her eye. For an instant, she thought it a trick of the storm, a ghost conjured by exhaustion and fear. But then the figure moved again, emerging from behind a rock outcropping. A tall man, rifle in hand, hat pulled low over his face, rain sluicing from the brim. Eloise froze. Her pulse thudded in her ears, drowning out the wind. The man raised his rifle. "Name yourself," he barked, voice rough as gravel, carrying easily over the gale. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. "Speak, woman, or I'll put a round through you and ask questions after." Lightning revealed his face for a heartbeat, weathered, scarred, with a grizzled beard and eyes like old iron. Not young, not kind, the sort of man you cross the street to avoid in daylight. "I, Eloise," she gasped. "I mean no harm." The rifle didn't waver. "Ain't no cause for a lady to be wandering alone out here, especially not dressed like you." "I was left. I'm trying to find shelter." He squinted through the rain, suspicion plain in every line of his face. "You one of Griggs?" he asked sharply. At that name, she flinched. Her silence was answer enough. The man spat into the mud. "God damn him," he muttered, lowering the rifle slightly. "Ain't got sense enough to bury his messes proper." He considered her for a long moment, as though weighing whether to finish what Mason had started. Then, with a grunt, he slung the rifle over his shoulder. "Come on," he said, "before you drown." She followed him without thinking, her legs numb, her heart pounding. He led her into a narrow canyon, the walls rising up on either side to shield them from the worst of the wind. A shallow alcove lay ahead, barely deep enough for shelter. Within moments, he had a fire coaxed to life, the flickering glow casting long shadows. The man handed her a frayed blanket from his saddlebag. She clutched it to herself, teeth chattering. "Name's Calder Boone," he said gruffly, as if the information was a burden he didn't want to carry anymore. "Don't expect I'm no good company, but you won't die of cold." She managed a trembling nod. The heat from the fire made her aware of how soaked and frozen she truly was. Her limbs ached, and every breath felt like it scraped against raw flesh. Boone crouched near the fire, feeding it bits of dry sagebrush and driftwood. His face, now clearer in the firelight, bore the hard-worn look of a man who'd seen too many winters and buried too many companions. "I don't trust easy," he warned without looking at her. "You so much as reach for that rifle I laid down, I'll get you like a trout." "I wouldn't," she whispered. He grunted. The storm howled beyond the canyon walls, the wind a chorus of mournful voices. The rain lessened, but thunder still rolled like cannon fire in the distance. Eloise stared into the flames, her mind heavy with exhaustion and despair. She thought of her father, likely believing her dead or disgraced beyond redemption. She thought of Mason's face, the smug grin as he rode away, the storm swallowing him whole. She hated him, hated herself for believing him. The child within her kicked, a small, desperate sign of life. She began to cry, silent tears tracking down her muddy cheeks. Boone didn't speak, didn't offer comfort, but he didn't turn away either. Instead, he muttered to himself, more to the flames than to her. "Always fending strays. Goddamn bad luck, following me like a damn ghost." Eloise lay down beside the fire, the warmth seeping into her bones. The blanket smelled of old leather and wood smoke, but it was warmth. Safety, however temporary. The storm raged on, but for the first time in hours, she slept. Dawn crept in slow and gray, the storm's fury spent but leaving the land sodden and raw. Water dripped from the rocks in steady, mournful beats, and the scorched scent of lightning lingered in the air. Eloise Calder stirred where she lay by the smoldering remains of the fire, the stiff wool of the blanket clinging to her skin. Her body ached in every corner, but she was alive. The first thing she saw was Calder Boone crouched over a small pot, the thin column of smoke curling upward from his modest fire. He was nursing a tin cup, the faint scent of coffee mixing with wet earth. His hat was pulled low, but she could see the sharp lines of his weathered face, the deep grooves around his mouth, and the gray threaded through his beard. He wasn't a young man, nor did he carry the softness of one. Everything about him looked like it had been carved by a rough hand and left to weather in the sun. Without looking up, he muttered, "You sleep like a corpse." She pushed herself upright, the soreness in her limbs dragging a wince from her throat. The storm had taken much from her strength, her hope, but not her stubbornness. "Didn't figure I'd get the chance," she replied hoarsely. A corner of Boone's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, more the ghost of one. He poured another cup of coffee and slid it across the dirt toward her. "Ain't much, but it's hot." Eloise took it with both hands, the warmth biting against her frozen fingers. She let it scald her throat, and it felt like life itself. For a while, neither spoke. The fire crackled softly, and the morning's pale light crept higher over the canyon walls. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk screamed. Finally, Calder grunted. "Name's Boone. Calder Boone." "I know who you are," she said, surprising herself. That made him glance at her, eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his hat. "Do you now? Folks tell stories. About a man who used to ride with the Callahan gang. About a Winchester that never missed. About a bandit who only killed those who had it coming." His eyes stayed on her a beat longer, then drifted back to the fire. "Stories get taller every year," he muttered. "Truth is, most men ain't worth much, and most lawmen less." Eloise cradled the cup in her lap. "I wasn't always out here either," she said quietly. I was a Calder." Boone raised a brow. "Judge Abram Calder's girl." She gave a small, bitter smile. "Was." The wind stirred ash between them, and Boone leaned back against a rock. "And now?" She hesitated. Lying came easy these days, but something in his face told her it wouldn't stick. I made a mistake. Trusted a man I shouldn't have. Thought he loved me. Thought he meant the words he spoke. He said nothing, waiting. I was gonna marry him, she continued, the words sour in her mouth. He promised me a homestead out near Carson's Bluff. Swore we'd be safe. Boone's gaze sharpened, his tone cutting through the haze. What's his name? She faltered. It don't matter. It matters. Eloise stared into the dying fire. The crackle and pop of the embers filled the space between them. At last, she spoke the name like a curse. Mason Griggs. Boone didn't move, but the change in him was instant. His jaw tightened, and a dark glint entered his eyes. That no-good bastard's been crawling these parts with his red knives. Heard he strung up a prospector 2 towns south for looking at him crosswise. Eloise's stomach turned. I didn't know. I didn't think. You thought wrong, Boone said flatly. And now you got a seed in you. You got a target on your back. She flinched at the words, though there was no malice in them. Just fact. Boone stood and began packing his saddlebag. You got kin nearby. Prospect Hollow, she said. A cousin. Martha. Only family I got left now. That's a hard ride, Boone muttered. And Griggs' men'll be sniffing after you before long. I don't need a nursemaid, Eloise shot back, her voice steadier than she felt. I've come this far. Boone studied her, noting the grit beneath the ruin. Most women would have laid down and let the storm have them. Hell, most men too. But not this one. Not with a kid in her gut and a past like shattered glass at her back. After a long pause, he huffed a sigh and slung his rifle across his shoulder. I'll ride with you. Eloise blinked. Why? For the kid's sake, he grumbled, kicking dirt over the fire. Ain't his fault what his daddy is. I can pay. Didn't ask for coin. He cinched the saddle on his weary bay mare. Listen good. I ain't looking to tangle with Griggs or his curs. I ride with you as far as Prospect Hollow. Then I'm gone. She nodded, though some small part of her wasn't sure she believed him. Boone took one last look around the canyon, his eyes scanning for any movement. The land was empty, save for the circling hawk and the endless stretches of sage and stone. But even as they mounted up and set out, the narrator's voice came soft and knowing, as though it spoke from the wind itself. Calder Boone was a man marked by his own ghosts. Once, his name was whispered with dread in outlaw circles from New Mexico to the Black Hills. He'd ridden hard and killed harder, but there was a line he never crossed. Never harm the helpless, the old code went. And when his gang betrayed the trust in a blood-soaked gold heist near Widow's Pass, Boone turned on them, left them dead in their tracks, took a bullet to the gut, and vanished into the wilderness. Some claimed he was buried beneath a cairn of stones. Others said he still walked the Badlands like a restless spirit, chasing something he couldn't name. That morning, as the sun finally clawed its way into the sky, Boone and Eloise rode side by side through the ragged country. Neither spoke much, but a thin thread of understanding stretched between them. What they didn't know, what the land itself seemed to hold its breath over, was that Griggs and his red knives weren't far behind. One of Mason's men, a lean rat-faced scout named Vic Danner, had picked up Eloise's trail not an hour before. He rode hard to his master, eager for the coin and the blood to come. Back on the trail, Boone slowed his horse, his sharp eyes scanning the ridges. Trouble's coming, he murmured. Eloise stiffened. You see something? Not yet, but I feel it. They rode on, toward Prospect Hollow, toward fate, and though Boone swore under his breath that he was done getting tangled in other folks' misfortunes, the narrator's voice made clear, some debts can't be left unpaid, some wrongs demand reckoning, and some men, no matter how far they run, can't outride the pull of justice. The land stretched wide and empty, an unforgiving sea of rock and sage. Calder Boone led the way through narrow canyons and winding dry riverbeds, the hooves of his bay mare stirring dust and brittle grass. Behind him, Eloise did her best to keep up. She was exhausted, her muscles aching and her back seizing from the burden of the child in her belly. Every jolt in the saddle sent fresh pain through her ribs, but she refused to complain. Not in front of him. Boone grumbled now and again, muttering about how she slowed the pace, about how any fool could see this was no country for a pregnant woman. But though his words were rough, he never once rode ahead without her. When her mare stumbled on a rock, he was there, steadying her reins. When dusk fell, he gathered kindling and started a fire without a word of protest. They made camp in the lee of a jagged hill, a thin moon rising in a cloudless sky. The storm had passed, but the wind still sang mournfully through the rocks, carrying the scent of dust and old bones. Their meals were sparse, dry biscuits and strips of jerked venison, washed down with bitter coffee. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep them moving. Eloise sat close to the fire, her hands cupping the warmth. Calder hunched on the other side, his hat low, his eyes distant. The flames painted flickering shadows across the deep lines of his face. He hadn't spoken much since morning. After a long silence, she ventured, "You said you lost someone." He didn't look up. "Long time ago." She waited, thinking he wouldn't say more, but after a minute, he let out a sigh like something heavy leaving his chest. "Wife. Little girl. Caught fever one winter while I was off chasing money and trouble." He flicked a twig into the fire. "By the time I got back, it was over." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be. Ain't your sorrow to carry." But Eloise saw it then, the battered decency behind the outlaw's scowl. Beneath the scars and worn leather, there was a man who'd once loved deeply and lost more than most could bear. And though he masked it with rough words and a rifle, he hadn't hardened all the way through. They rode again at first light, through rising heat and shifting sands. The land grew harsher, the trail narrowing as sheer rock walls rose on either side. Widow's Pass. Calder knew the place well. The narrow cut in the cliffs left no room to turn or hide. Perfect ground for an ambush. He called a halt and scanned the ridges. "Something don't feel right." Eloise stiffened in her saddle. "What is it?" "Been around too long not to smell trouble." He gestured to a cleft in the rocks. "We make it through this. We're half day from Prospect Hollow." "What if we don't?" He looked at her then, his eyes like cold iron in the morning light. "Then we fight." High above, Vic Danner crouched behind a boulder, squinting down the slope. His teeth gleamed like a jackal's. He had them dead to rights. He signaled to the others, half a dozen men, armed and eager, and the red knives closed in. Dusk came with a red sun bleeding into the horizon. The shadows in the pass lengthened, and Calder's unease grew. He tightened the cinch on his rifle and led the way through the narrowing trail, the walls closing around them like a noose. It happened fast. A sharp whistle cut through the air. "Down!" Boone barked, yanking Eloise's reins as gunfire exploded from the rocks. The first shot missed, slamming into the dirt near Boone's boot. The second hit his saddlebag, tearing leather. Boone's rifle was up before the echo faded, and he dropped a man off the ridge with a clean shot between the eyes. Eloise slid from her saddle, scrambling behind a boulder as bullets ripped through the air. Her heart pounded, her breath ragged in her throat. Calder moved like a man born for violence. His rifle cracked again, and another outlaw tumbled down the rocky slope, his body twisting like a rag doll. "Keep your head down," he shouted to her. Gunfire lit the pass in bursts of orange. The gang pressed closer, thinking Boone was just some luck-struck drifter. But he moved with the lethal grace of a predator, his shots precise, his calm unshaken. From her cover, Eloise watched him. She'd seen men shoot before, back in town, on hunting trips, in saloons when liquor boiled blood. But this was different. Boone fought like a legend, like those stories told over campfires. Each pull of the trigger was final, unhesitating. One outlaw made the mistake of breaking cover, and Boone drilled him through the chest. Somewhere behind the rocks, a voice shouted in sudden alarm. "That's Boone. It's Calder Boone. Thought you was dead, you son of a bitch." The name spread like wildfire. Eloise heard it, and something inside her twisted. It wasn't a tall tale. It wasn't just fear and campfire stories. This was Calder Boone, the gunman whose name still lingered in wanted posters, and who left the dead to speak for him. The red knives faltered. They hadn't come expecting a legend. A wiry outlaw with a scar across his face called out, "Pull back." Pull back, damn it. Within moments, the gunfire thinned, the gang retreating into the rocks. 2 of their number lay still, and a third crawled away trailing blood. Boone didn't lower his rifle until the last of them vanished. Eloise clutched her belly, her breathing ragged. You were one of them," she whispered. Boone looked down at her, weariness in his face. "Was. A long time back. You lied. Didn't tell you anything one way or the other," he said roughly. "Don't owe you my life story." She rose shakily to her feet. "You're Calder Boone. I heard your name in every town between here and Albuquerque. They say you robbed a train solo, that you shot down 3 lawmen in one fight." He met her gaze. "Ain't proud of what I was. But I'll tell you plain, girl, Griggs won't stop. Not now. He knows you're alive, and if he don't kill you, he's finished. You can run, you can pray, but you'll never outpace him." Eloise swallowed hard. The terror she'd known when Mason first left her in the storm rose like a tide, but now there was something else mixed in, a grim resolve. "What do we do?" Boone chambered another round in his rifle. "We finish it." The last light of day bled out behind the hills, and the cold settled in. Boone cast a glance back the way the red knives had gone, his jaw tight. "I didn't reckon on getting mixed up in this," he muttered. "Swore I was done with other folks' troubles." But in the gathering dark, even he knew it was a lie. This wasn't just Eloise's fight anymore. It was his. By the time the jagged peaks gave way to the open flats of Prospect Hollow, dusk had sunk low against the hills, painting the sky in muted shades of purple and rust. The town wasn't much, a scatter of weather-beaten cabins, a single saloon leaning a little to the left, a livery stable, and a church with a bell that hadn't rung in years. Dust clung to everything like a second skin, and the wind stirred tumbleweeds along the empty street. Calder Boone rode in first, his Winchester cradled across his saddle horn. Behind him, Eloise sat straight in her saddle, pale but unbroken, her eyes fixed on the town like a soldier sizing up a battlefield. The last days had stripped away any softness in her. Whatever had been left of the rancher's daughter was gone. What remained was something harder, forged by betrayal and storm and blood. As Boone's horse clopped past the saloon, a few faces appeared at the windows, narrow-eyed men with weeks of unshaved beards and hollow cheeks. At the livery, an old man in a battered hat spat in the dirt and muttered something to himself. They knew Boone's face, the way men remember bad weather and old debts. Calder pulled up outside the saloon and dismounted. Eloise slid down stiffly, one hand to her belly, and he caught her elbow without a word. Together, they crossed the threshold into stale air and the sour stink of old whiskey. The saloon's interior was dim and close. Half a dozen townsfolk sat hunched at tables, conversation dying as they entered. The barkeep froze in mid-wipe of a glass, his jaw slack. "Boone," one man said, as if naming a ghost. Calder ignored him. "Get the council," he said. "Now." Within minutes, a cluster of men gathered. The mayor, a wiry man with watery eyes, a blacksmith built like a freight horse, a retired Union sergeant with a limp and a voice like gravel, and a few ranch hands with sun-leathered faces. They all looked at Boone, like a rattlesnake coiled under their table. Eloise stepped forward before Calder could speak. She was deathly pale, her hair limp, but she held her chin high. "My name is Eloise Calder," she announced, "daughter of Judge Abram Calder. Mason Griggs left me for dead in the wilderness. He's coming for me. If you've a lick of decency, you'll stand with us." The men exchanged glances. The mayor cleared his throat. "Miss Calder, your family's name carries weight, but you have to understand, Griggs runs this land now. Folks who cross him don't live long." A murmur of uneasy agreement rippled through the room. Eloise's voice trembled, but it didn't break. "If you let him ride in here and murder me, you'll be no better than him." Calder took a step forward and slammed his Winchester down on the table. The sound cracked through the saloon like a shot. "Listen here," he growled. "You can hide in your houses, waiting for Mason Griggs to bleed you dry one by one, or you can plant your feet now. Because if you don't, you're already dead men." The room fell to a heavy silence. The blacksmith grunted. "He's right." The old sergeant rubbed his jaw. "I fought at Shiloh. Seen better men than Griggs. I ain't dying cowering in my bed. One by one, a few heads nodded. Get what rifles you have, Boone ordered. Nail boards over the saloon windows. Sandbags on the main street. We'll make our stand here. They scattered, some grumbling, but none refusing. By nightfall, Prospect Hollow had the look of a town on the edge of siege. Barrels were hauled into place. The church bell was lowered to block the main road. Calder posted men behind wagons and in the livery's loft. He gave Eloise a revolver. I've never shot a man, she said. Shoot straight, he answered, and you won't have to twice. Under his guidance, she fired a few rounds into a battered fence post behind the livery. Her hands trembled at first, but the fourth shot hit clean. By the sixth, her jaw was set. I'll be damned, Boone muttered. Later, they sat by the fire in the saloon's back room, lantern light flickering against the walls. Outside, the wind carried the distant sound of hooves. Calder stared into the flames, his voice low. You asked before about my past, about the men I rode with. You don't have to. I do. He rubbed a hand over his face. I was a bastard, Eloise. Ain't no sugar to it. Robbed, killed, whatever earned $1. But there were lines I wouldn't cross. When my gang started killing women, children, I turned on him. Put half of him in the ground. The rest scattered. Been running from it since. Eloise didn't answer for a long time. Then she reached out, her fingers brushing his calloused hand. You're the only man who's stood by me since this began, she said. Whatever you were, it don't matter to me now. For a moment, something passed between them. Not the soft, foolish kind of affection born in youth, but a bond forged by hardship and shared defiance. No words were needed. Boone cleared his throat. I reckon we should get some sleep. But neither of them moved from the fire for a while. When dawn began to thin the night sky, the lookout called down from the livery roof. A dust plume rose on the horizon, stretching like a snake across the flats. They're coming, the lookout said. Boone rose, slinging his Winchester. Time to see what kind of men Prospect Hollow's made of. He turned to Eloise, his voice like rough-cut timber. Stay close to the saloon. And don't hesitate. I won't, she said. Outside, the town settled into grim silence, each man gripping his rifle, eyes fixed on the road ahead. The earth trembled beneath the coming horses. Calder Boone flexed his fingers around the rifle stock. Whatever came next, he wouldn't run. Not this time. The sun rose slow and mean, a blood-orange disk clawing its way over the ridgeline, setting the dust in the street aglow like old gunpowder. Prospect Hollow held its breath. The air was thick with the weight of what was coming, as though the land itself had seen too much killing and knew when death was near. A line of riders appeared at the far end of town, their horses kicking up a trail of dust. The red knives. Rough men with sun-scorched faces, eyes cold and hollow. Rifles rested across saddlebows, 6 shooters heavy at their hips. And at their head rode Mason Griggs. Even on a battlefield of murderers, Mason looked born to the role. A handsome face marred by the cruel set of his mouth, silver spurs glinting in the sun, and a long coat billowing like storm clouds behind him. His pale eyes scanned the town with lazy arrogance. He reined up in front of the saloon, his voice carrying like a preacher's over a quiet congregation. Calder Boone, he called. Come out and die like a man. Silence stretched, broken only by the restless shuffle of horses. Then Calder stepped through the saloon doors, Winchester in hand, eyes shaded beneath the brim of his battered hat. I figured you'd run by now, Mason sneered. Boone's voice was iron. Not this time. Mason's gaze flicked to the upper window, where Eloise's face appeared for an instant before vanishing. His grin spread, sharp and hateful. Eloise, he called. You got one chance, girl. Come down now, and I'll forget all about your little desert tantrum. I'll even let you keep the brat. From the window came a single, unmistakable sound, the sharp, wet spat of saliva hitting the street. The men around Mason snickered, some nervously. Mason's grin curdled. Kill him, he growled. Gunfire tore through the quiet like a thunderclap. The street exploded into chaos. Calder dropped to a knee, his Winchester bucking against his shoulder. The first outlaw to charge caught a bullet clean between the eyes and tumbled from his saddle. The second made it 3 steps before Boone's second shot punched a hole through his chest. The defenders fought hard. The blacksmith went down with a slug to the gut, but took one of the red knives with him. The old Union sergeant managed to drop 2 before a bullet ripped through his throat. Dust and blood filled the air. Boone was everywhere at once, a ghost of violence. His rifle cracked again and again, each shot impossibly fast, impossibly sure. He moved like a man born with iron in his blood, cutting down outlaws as they came. Mason's right-hand man, a thick-shouldered killer named Dorn, tried to flank him. Boone's shot took his kneecap clean off, dropping him howling into the dust. "Damn you, Boone!" Mason shouted over the din. The remaining red knives hesitated, their numbers cut nearly in half. Then, as if by some unspoken accord, the gunfire faltered. The battle paused. Calder stepped into the open, the Winchester low at his side. Mason dismounted, revolver in hand. "You should have stayed dead." Mason spat. "You should have kept your word to the girl," Boone replied. They circled, the world narrowing to the space between them. "You and me," Mason said. "Always was going to come to this." "Never gave a damn about you, Griggs," Boone muttered. "But I'll bury you just the same." For a long moment, nothing moved. Even the horses seemed to hold still, sweat dark on their hides. Then Mason went for his gun. It was fast. Calder was faster. His rifle cracked once, the bullet slicing through Mason's right shoulder, spinning him half around. But the outlaw didn't fall. Blood soaked his coat, his gun hand trembling. "I should have killed you years ago," Mason rasped. "You tried," Boone said, raising the Winchester for the last time. Then a sharp report split the air, not from Boone's rifle, but from the second-story window. The shot struck Mason square in the chest. His face froze in shock, the revolver slipping from his fingers. He staggered back, 1 step, then 2, and collapsed into the dust. From the window, smoke curled from the barrel of the revolver in Eloise's steady hands. For a moment, no one spoke. Then one of the red knives dropped his gun. "Boss is dead," someone muttered. Like wolves without a leader, the gang broke. Horses turned, hooves pounding, men fleeing for the hills. The fight was over. Boone let his rifle fall to his side, his chest heaving, sweat mixing with blood and grime. He looked up at Eloise in the window. She still held the revolver, though her hands now shook. He tipped his hat. The survivors gathered their dead. The blacksmith wouldn't see another dawn, nor the old sergeant. The town bore its wounds, but Prospect Hollow still stood. When the dust finally settled, the townsfolk came to Boone. Their fear was gone, replaced by something like respect. The mayor stammered thanks. The barkeep poured him a drink on the house. And Calder Boone, the outlaw who had once run from blood and grief, stayed. He helped bury the dead. He repaired fence lines, taught the young farmhand how to shoot straight. When Eloise gave birth months later, it was Boone who stood outside the door, guarding against any dark thing that might come. They never spoke of love. It wasn't needed. In a land that took more than it gave, what they had was something harder, sharper, a bond forged in fire and storm. And as the seasons turned, the legend of Prospect Hollow spread. How Calder Boone, the deadliest gun in 3 territories, built a fire for a woman in a storm and found something he never sought: a home, a family, and redemption.